Hey friends, today we're going to be talking about horror movie subgenres and themes. I was going to do just subgenres, but a lot of these are technically themes. If you have to put down what movies are usually genred by in category sections of websites, there isn't really a lot, and I really want to break down everything we love and dislike about horror movies and find some overlap. There will be a lot of things that overlap, a lot of things that can be found across different themes and different genres, but that is because horror is so diverse and I just can't wait to talk about it with you guys. So here are the tiers. My idea and approach to this today is if I heard about a horror movie being made about blank, would I be really excited to go see it at the cinema, or would I skip it? That's the fair way to approach a list. I think it's kind of relatable. So at the S tier, the top tier, we have most anticipated. I think about this with the start of the year. If I hear a horror movie is this kind of genre, it has this kind of theme, can't wait. It's a good time. Whether the film is fantastic or not, I just love this theme, this subgenre so much that I am very interested in it. And regardless of how great the actual film as a whole is, I'm still gonna have a good time. B, unpredictable. These are the films that I'm just not too sure if it's gonna work out for me. It's hit or miss usually with these themes or subgenres, so it's gonna depend. C is a risky cinema trip. When I know that this movie is about this, I know most of the time it's risky. There are some outliers, but it's a risk. D is group only watch. These are the films I'll still watch it. It's not my favorite personally subgenre or theme, but I'll still watch it, but probably just in a group setting, somewhere where it's fun and I can discuss it with friends who also like horror. I had to put in something other than that because there has to be something, maybe, I don't know, something in this list that I avoid. I don't know if there is, but I put in watch list purgatory. These are the films people say you gotta watch. And I really want to, but I cannot make myself. So they go to the cinema. I'm like, I'm definitely gonna check it out. Maybe, oh no, okay, it's on streaming now. Maybe I'll check it out. And it just sits on your to watch list forever. So it's watch list purgatory. Okay, let's get started. We're starting with good old action horror. Think Train to Busan. We've got Alien here. Underwater, They Live, Violent Night. All of the films that have the action sequences in it, you know, probably A Quiet Place, especially the new one, would be action horror as well as other things, but action horror. There is going to be overlap, okay? We've got an Alien for action horror and then we've got Alien later. So there's always going to be overlap, okay? Especially when we're talking about themes and subgenres. Things can be multiple themes and they can be multiple subgenres. Action horror, I never used to like. This used to be for me a group watch only category, but as of late, I found a lot of horror movies that I've been loving, like Abigail and Quiet Place Day One, this year have been action-based, and I feel myself opening up a little bit more to it. So I would actually put this, believe it or not, in unpredictable, which is quite a step up from where I started a couple of years ago to the way I used to talk about action horror. I never used to watch action films. They kind of bore me. There's too much going on. I have changed my mind, and I am a big fan of the Alien series, so I kind of eat my words. I would say it's more unpredictable whether I'm going to like it or not, and so I am more inclined to go to the cinema and give it a chance. Next is folk horror. I think a lot of you guys out there actually love folk horror. I feel like that is something that my community is very interested in. Folk horror is usually in a rural setting with folk religion, paganism, isolation, or a close relationship to the land and witchcraft. We do have a lot of things that overlap into folk horror, including Gothic horror. I also was going to put period horror on this list, but there was too much overlap and it was too close together. Then we're just talking about singular horror movies or a handful of horror movies that only possess one of those elements. Folk horror, I think, is always quite interesting, although it can be a slow burn, so it really does depend on your mood. And although I love the idea of folk horror, and every time I hear about folk horror coming to the cinema, I really do want to champion it, and I really hope it's good. I do find it to be a little bit risky. I'm not gonna lie. It's definitely hit and miss. Some films I love are like Pyewacket, obviously The Witch, Gretel and Hansel, absolutely love. And the thing I really love about folk horror is I'm a huge fan of fairy tales. Love those kinds of stories. Green Knight, which I guess isn't kind of horror, but all of those kind of elements. November is such a beautiful folk horror, one of my favorites. So although I do think it's kind of risky, I am still very interested every time. It's piqued my interest. It is unpredictable, but I do find that it's usually a good time. Did that surprise you that I said that in the end? I started pretty low, but I talked myself into it because honestly, I will watch any folk horror. It's going to be a good time because I love the atmosphere. Next, found footage. Found footage is one of my favorite subgenres. I just love the creativity. I love the idea that it doesn't really matter the budget. A lot of the best found footage movies are on a low budget. We got Blair Witch Project, obviously, Paranormal Activity, Wreck, all of those films. They just have such an interesting approach to filmmaking, which is what I really love. But it is a very hit and miss. When it comes to budget filmmaking, that can be a little bit of a strange territory. And it's really hard with found footage to get out there and watch every single film. I absolutely love found footage. And if I know what the storyline is going into it, I'll be more inclined to watch it. But I'm not going to lie, a lot of these films stay on my watch list purgatory, and it's hard. You really have to be recommended good found footage because there's so much to go through and it is very risky. Like all of these films, it would be dependent on the trailer that you see, whether you want to go and see it or not. And I don't watch trailers, but whatever the premise is, the marketing behind it, they really do have to sell it for found footage. Unfortunately, that is one I totally understand. Maybe not going in completely blind to unless it's been highly recommended to you. I think it's just a little bit different to these other genres because I know there's so much budget found footage and it doesn't work out great. But if it's a trip to the cinema and it's on that level of being released like that, then it's most anticipated. You didn't see me going there, but I am approaching it like if I'm going to the cinema. So if that is the case, yes, if I know there's a found footage horror movie and it's at the cinema, I am there, front center. Maybe not the front. I don't like sitting at the very front, but middle center. I'm there with my snacks ready to go. I love found footage and I won't apologize, but because of the reasons I just said, I am going to put it in a good time. I think that's quite fair because I'm always going to have a good time because I love the approach, but it isn't always executed the best. I can admit to that. Ghost. I absolutely love ghost stories and I love seeing them done in different ways. And ghost stories are very interesting because I also have possession on here and then I have religious, which are two, I'm really getting into the nitty gritty and the definitions between them because ghost stories are technically hard to come by these days. Haunted stories, there's not a lot of them. They're usually possession, but I love ghost stories. And honestly, when something focuses purely on ghosts, I'm into it. I feel like we rarely do that these days. So I'm very much, I would put that in most anticipated, believe it or not. I just don't think that we focus solely on ghosts enough. And as soon as I hear about another story with that, I'm there. Okay, Gothic is an interesting one because that kind of overlaps with a little bit of folk horror. I think people put those ideas together. But while folk horror describes a work setting, Gothic horror describes its tone. It's described as a battle between humanity and unnatural forces of evil, sometimes man-made, sometimes supernatural. This is within an oppressive and bleak landscape. It's considered to be a true trademark of Gothic horror novels. So think Crimson Peak, Dracula, Frankenstein especially. I love this genre. Again, one that we don't see enough of, one that I would love for them to touch on more. And it's more of an aesthetic, as we just talked about, more of a tone, a feeling, an atmosphere, kind of like folk horror, but in a different way, more unnatural. I think Gothic as a setting, we do not get enough. I wouldn't say it is my most anticipated, something that I'm running to the cinema for, but it's something I know is going to be good because it's going to be a little bit different. It's going to take a different approach. Gore and splatter. I love a gore film. All of the Evil Dead, I was only thinking about the remakes, but even the original Evil Dead, so gory in its own way, obviously with more practical effects, but we've got, Hostel, Human Centipede, Saw, I guess would count. I love some gore. Gore is interesting if I heard a film is coming out at the cinema because it doesn't usually happen that way. Most of the gory films that are in the cinema, they're so polished. And then there's the splatter, actual splatter ones that are more watch at home kind of material. So when I hear a gore splatter film is disgusting, depraved, and going to the cinema, or even if it's coming out and it's highly talked about, like When Evil Lurks, it still piques my interest. As much as I love disturbing movies that are usually psychological, there is something about knowing there's a gore aspect in a movie and still being interested. I was not the biggest fan of Terrifier. We've talked about this several times. I have videos on it. Don't grill me here. But I still want to go out and watch those films. So I think it is more unpredictable, but it's still up there for me. It's just more so when people really hype up gory films, you have no idea what level of gore they like. So I feel like that can be unpredictable in approaching a film blind, going into a blind. Home Invasion. This is probably the first one that I'm like, I would probably just watch this unless it has someone really cool in it or it's directed by someone I really love. You guys know I go out and see every single horror movie there is. So, I'm approaching this from my own perspective, not really reviewing perspective. But Home Invasion really isn't one of my favorite subgenres. I would usually give this one a skip. I am not totally excited for these ones every time they come out. I know a lot of people love Home Invasion, but it just doesn't work for me. I don't think I'm scared of that. This one I think is a risky cinema trip, or I do like watching these ones with as a group watch. If I heard there was an okay Home Invasion, I might want to set up a group watch with a bunch of people and watch it together. Group watches for Home Invasions are always so good as well because you can talk such mad shit about all of their choices. And I feel like it's a fun movie in that regard. As much as I do appreciate and understand why people are scared of the original Strangers, it didn't work for me on that level. I can appreciate it as a really good movie. It's really well put together. The blocking is insane and the way it holds the tension is so good. I rewatched it before watching the new one. It just didn't work on me the same way. There's also like No Vacancy. Hush was okay. I liked Hush. I'm not running to the cinema. I'm always gonna go, but I'm not running. So I'm gonna put it in group watch. Actually, believe it or not, I'm putting that one in group watch. I'm pretty firm on that. Occult. Girl. I do have a definition for occult. The occult is a category of esoteric or supernatural beliefs and practices which generally fall outside of the scope of organized religion and science. Films like A Dark Song, Suspiria, or quite recent, Bag of Lies and Baghead. I love the occult because I love anything twisted but new. Usually the whole premise of occult films, or the ones I've just mentioned, are people who are desperate, grieving, or, really going through something, and they need to find a solution and they turn to something that they don't truly understand, and then things happen. And I love that storyline. I kind of like it every time, to be honest. I'm always going to have a good time with the occult. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of the occult. Okay, we got possession. I did keep possession and religious separate. I feel like these are two different things because possession I see more as it could be anything from Ouija to The Exorcist. And although The Exorcist obviously has some religious tones, I feel like you can be possessed in a movie and it isn't really centered around the church. So religious I find to be more centered around being religious and the church, nunneries, all that kind of stuff. So I still count The Exorcist under possession because Pazuzu, Captain Howdy, the way it all kind of came about really wasn't anything to do with religion, although it does. I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. Possession. I love it. I eat it for breakfast. Trust me. If I could be possessed, no. I just love possession movies, but there are some stinkers. There are some big old stinkers. There was a period there where they were just throwing anything at the wall and seeing if it's stuck. We're kind of phasing out of that, and then we phased into religious. It was almost like Russell Crowe got possessed in a film and then they decided they're not gonna do possession anymore. He ruined it for everybody. I love possession films when they're done right, but I think it can be unpredictable and almost risky. I would probably say if a film I love the idea of it, but if a film is going to the cinema, it can be quite risky. I've said it before, they do the black eyes, they do the veins popping out, they do the black fog or like mist coming out of the mouth. Although in saying all of that, there are a few films out at the moment, or even on my top 10 so far of this year, that have possession elements in them, just different to the sole focus of the film. They're kind of put there in really interesting ways. I really want to put it in unpredictable because I love possession, but I am approaching this as if I'm going to the cinema and what we're really getting fed. And for that reason, I'm still going to keep it in risky because I just don't feel like we have films that are solely based on possession that aren't risky yet. Remember, guys, this is meant to be conversational based. This is us thinking and brainstorming about what we really want out of horror as a genre. Psychological, though, like, I don't even have to say anything. That's straight away most anticipated. If something is a psychological horror movie, I am there. Middle of the cinema. I love psychological horror. I love psychological thriller. That's where I belong. That's what I love. Psychological ghost, yes. Let's go. I would love to hear if anyone watching this video does not like psychological horror or thriller. That would be very interesting to learn. After this, we have religious. I know a lot of people put it down as risky. I love religious horror. I do feel like although they've told the same story again and again and again, and you know what it is, say it with me now. Woman wants to dedicate her life to God. She goes to a mysterious country she's never been. She can't speak the language. And then she finds out the facility that she is supposed to be working in is evil. Yes, you heard me there. Once again, just like possession, it's a risky cinema trip. It is really risky. They're kind of a dime a dozen at this point. And I love them. Again, I loved Immaculate. I loved The First Omen. But there has been so many, again, Russell Crowe, I'm going to blame you. There's been so many films that have come out and it's just the same thing. The Nun 2. I feel like they're really beating a horse at this point, but I do like the look of it. I can just understand it can be risky. Risky isn't always bad. It's just a risk. It's a risk that you're taking. I want to make that clear. It's a risk. Technically, the first 4 of these are pretty good, and they do always have outliers that are good. And when they're good, they're great. Always. Okay, Alien. Okay, I'm sorry, Alien's always going to be a good time for me. I absolutely love Alien films. If I'm scared by anything on this list, it's Aliens. I'm not scared by Home Invasion, but Aliens, it's always challenging, usually very different. I guess Aliens are more focused on in creature features these days, where we have different looking aliens. You know, it's kind of like a creature feature, maybe body horror, action. But if it has the idea of an alien at its core, love. I would die for a horror movie right now to come out about grey aliens because they don't do it anymore. And that's all I want. So, you know what? Actually, I'm going to put it up the top because if an alien horror movie was coming to the cinemas, it would be at number 1 on my to watch list. I am seeing Alien next week. Just anything to do with aliens to the core, love it. And it is most anticipated, which Alien is. So that really works for me. Okay, slashers. I think when we talk about slashers, we think about the classics constantly. And slashers can be across all subgenres and a lot of different themes too, because we can have a Christmas slasher, we can have a comedy slasher. Slasher really is a core part of horror, obviously, and it's what a lot of people think of when they think of horror movies. They only think of slashers. They think of Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, You're Next, well, maybe not You're Next, but you know, like even Halloween, do people consider that a slasher? I think that slashers are the backbone of horror, for sure. I'm never going to deny that. But if a slasher is coming out at the cinema, you better hope that it has some originality to it. And I do think that they've been done in so many different ways, dragged through franchises, that I am kind of not side-eyeing, but when I go in, I'm not too sure how it's going to end up. I wouldn't say that it's as risky as a cinema trip as Possession and Religious, but I would say it's unpredictable. Slashers are usually horror's version of whodunit mysteries. It's like a murder mystery whodunit with a knife. Very active and a mask usually. And I think it can be a make or break situation depending on who the killer is, the reveals, and how it's done, the gore, all that good stuff. So I think it's quite unpredictable, to be fair. Vampires, we don't get a lot of, and I do feel like there's, just within that term vampire, there are so many different versions of what a vampire could be There are so many different rules that they abide by. But we're talking about horror vampires. So vampires that are actually meant to be scary. Let the right one in to Salem's Lot. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of different ways you can look at a vampire and a lot of unconventional ways. I actually really adore a vampire story. And I do think that they're kind of different every time. I think that these ones would be unpredictable. I think that it can be good or bad, and it's very dependent on the theme and the way it's presented. So I don't think it's risky. I think it's like, let's go in and see what this film is going to give us. And werewolves. Okay, werewolves are not my absolute favorite. It took me a while to get around to werewolves. And you know what? Even though vampire kind of has this problem, not really a problem, but this aspect as well, it's more of the action. I feel like there's a lot of action in werewolf films. Although, of course, there's the outliers, An American Werewolf in London, The Wolf of Snow Hollow. I absolutely love that film. I find that they do have a lot of action sequences, and that used to kill the vibe for me. Also, the look of the werewolves is something that is really hard to pull off and to make it believable. So I do think that werewolves are a little bit more risky than a vampire. I would love to see more werewolf films, but I do think that they put themselves in line to be a little bit more of a risky cinema trip. Okay, westerns. I say this knowing that Ari Aster's next film is a western. And I'm scared. I'm not a big western fan, I have to say. It took me forever to watch The Wind, and I only watched The Wind because my partner bought it for me, and we did it as, I think we did it as a 12 Days of Christmas. If you guys know that series I used to do where I would unwrap a random horror movie and have to watch it and review it that night. I think that's the only reason I did The Wind. It was literally stuck, you know where? It was stuck on my watch list purgatory. Bone Tomahawk, pretty good one. I mean, yeah, once they come around every now and then, I will acknowledge them. That's so mean. I will put them on my this is coming this month list, and I'll have the intention, in the back of my head, I'm like, I should probably check that one out. And then I'm gonna be for real. They sit there. I didn't think I was gonna have anything in my watch list purgatory, but I do. If a film was coming out and you guys wanted me to review it and it was a western, I would. But I can't approach that like this because otherwise all of them I would. I'm sorry. I'm just being truthful. I find it to be slow, and the action is even less appealing than normal because it's usually far away shots, standoffs, just a lot of slow dryness, which people might love that atmosphere, but it's not for me. Okay, next up, witches. All of them, witches. We're gonna move it up here straight away. I love all witch films. You know what's really interesting? When I was putting together this video, I was thinking about all of the different categories and how they kind of come together. And witches, there's not a lot of modern witch horror movies where the witches, them being witches, isn't the reveal. It's usually always the reveal, like, haha, they were witches. The picture here is of The Craft, but I love witch. And Witching and Bitching is one that doesn't get talked about enough, but I would love some more witches. Witches are always a good time. I'm actually going to take this a step up, because if I heard that there was a horror movie coming out in a couple of months and it was about witches, my mind would start turning. What kind of witches? What kind of beliefs do they have? How are they going to do this? The themes, everything that goes into it is so exciting and something that I want to see. So I think we need more of it, and I think that people aren't risky enough with it. I feel like people aren't taking the chance enough to focus their story on witchcraft, and the moment they do, love it. Zombies. No. I think that's quite fair for me. Zombies overplayed too much. We're doing too much all the time. We're coming out of that. I think it was really interesting the time period that zombies were popular around, because it was pre-COVID, and now that, you know, things, I mean, people, obviously it's not back to normal, but whatever's happening, people are over the zombies, and I can understand why. It got a little bit too real there, and zombies have been, The Walking Dead killed zombies like several seasons ago, but yet there's 11 spin-offs, I'm pretty sure. I'm gonna fact check that, but I believe there's 11 spin-offs for The Walking Dead. I'll list them here. So I think I would only watch a zombie movie now with the group. There was a time a few years ago now, I went and saw The Night Eats the World. In fact, I think that was in 2018. And I think that was the last zombie film I saw at the cinema, if you count The Evil Dead. That's, I guess, where it gets tricky if they're possessed, if they're coming back to life, if that's reanimation. That's a whole nother category. If that's the case, I would put it in risky, but straight up zombies, I would put it in watch only. Although I say that, and then I loved Lisa Frankenstein. So, okay, I'm going to put it risky. I think that's fair then, because I can't have something in my top 10 and say I can only watch it in a group watch. Okay. No, I honestly do think it's risk. I screw it. As I said earlier, there are outliers. There's always outliers. In every single one of these genres, there's outliers. But zombies, usually a pass for me. Or if someone wants to watch it at a group watch, I'll be happy to do that. I like talking about the makeup and the setting, all that kind of stuff, but I have to watch it with someone else. Okay, Anthology. Anthology for me never stuck, but there are some outliers. I love Three Extremes, but there's films like Trick or Treat. Obviously, we've got Creepshow here, but your Anthology film is only as good as your weakest pick, and we see this with the VHS films, if you know why I'm saying it like that. It is really hit and miss every time. I think that Anthology would be a risky cinema trip, but I do think that it's more unpredictable than that, especially if it was a cinema trip, because if I heard there was a new Anthology film coming out, especially at the cinema, I would be very intrigued. You don't really see that often, and you know what? I know it's not horror. A lot of people said it's got horror elements, but Kinds of Kindness is a film that I truly loved, and that is technically Anthology. I do think that there's good anthologies. I just think that it's very far and few in between. It can be unpredictable. Okay, next, Apocalyptic. I'm actually not a big fan of apocalyptic movies. I have The Mist in here, which is kind of a creature feature as well. People call these disaster films as well, but I think when it's got to do with horror movies, usually the disaster is the end of the world. So I put these together. These are films like Arcadian, 28 Days Later, which of course, again, it's a zombie film. The Mist, The Girls with All the Gifts, Quiet Place, films that take place at the end of time. For me, it kind of gets into the fantasy kind of sci-fi element, which we don't have sci-fi here, but a lot of these are science fiction in their own right. Like we've got Alien, this, cosmic horrors coming up, body horror, lots of different elements. I'm more attracted to realism when it comes to horror movies. So when there's a apocalyptic movie coming out, it has to have a very strong storyline or a difference about it to really sway me. I wouldn't say this is my favorite subgenre or theme at all. But I wouldn't say it's a group watch only. I would be intrigued, but I would say it's probably like risky for me whether I'm gonna really love it. It just doesn't really appeal to me as much as these other ones. Body horror though, I love body horror. I feel like body horror movies usually utilize a lot of great metaphors, and we're watching the transformation of someone through trauma, through experience, their look at self-identity. There's a lot to be explored within body horror and a lot that reflects us and just being human and the human experience. And although I just said with apocalyptic, I don't really like fantasy stuff, I feel like body horror is the link between fantasy or, just fantastical elements and the darkness that people find within themselves. And I just think I love body horror. I'm a big fan. Every time I hear about a body horror, I'm usually going to have a good time. I will put it in a good time. I watch a body horror no matter what. I'm always interested to see how they utilize that and express it visually and through the storyline, through the development. I think it's a really interesting genre and idea. When I think about body horror, I think about films like The Fly, The Brood, Tusk, which is one of my favorites. You guys know that. And also, I'd love to know, with the ones that we're talking about right now, where would you put Hellraiser? Because Hellraiser could be a body horror. I would love to know where you guys think Hellraiser lands through just the ones here. Because maybe otherwise it would be science fiction, or alien? I don't know, or creature feature? But body horror, there's a lot of that going on, especially within the first Hellraiser, which I absolutely adore. That is my favorite part, watching him and the floor transition. Magic. Jesus wept, you know what I mean? Christmas horror. I had to put this in here because I think it's a really cool discussion point. I love Christmas horror movies. Usually a lot of them are similar these days. A lot of violent Santas, a lot of messing with imagery that we had since childhood and really turning on it on its head. And I think that that's a very cool and like just badass idea. That's where horror really shines, when it pushes boundaries, especially, you know me, I love disturbing movies. So I just love messing with that imagery and doing that in an unapologetic way. And I think Christmas horror can do that great. But also the ones that aren't even messing with that imagery, well, I guess they kind of are, but they still have the idea about family. Like, you know, films like Krampus or Silent Night, the newer one. It's a very interesting look at family and love, but kind of twisted through the lens of horror. I will say there is a lot of Christmas horror that does get put on my probably group watch only, because I will watch it as a group and it's so fun to do that. But if there is a new Christmas horror coming out, I usually give it a go. But I will say there's a lot going on and a lot of people are messing with this genre and not really coming up with very iconic ideas. A really good one to watch is Treevenge. It's a short. It's a horror short on YouTube. I highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite horror shorts of all time. And I watch that every Christmas, actually, as a group watch. I really do like the genre, but I do think it can be very risky because it seems like every year everyone is just coming up with the same ideas and it's just a visual idea of a Santa with an axe, which is exactly what this picture is. But there's so many movies with it. It's just messing with that twisted idea of Santa. And although I love that idea, I feel like we've seen it a lot. And I do feel like unfortunately, I love Christmas horror, but I do unfortunately feel like it's a risky move. I'm sorry. We really do have a bunch of good ones, but I think you would probably put 10 on your must-watch list. And to think about that overall as just 10 out of all of them, every year it's a little bit risky. Do you know what I mean? When there's a new one coming out, it's a little bit of a risky watch. Okay, next up, comedy horror. I love comedy horror, but again, comedy can mean so many different things to so many different people because there's different genres within comedy, satire, slapstick. So it depends, again, on the outliers and also your personal preference, the way it's displayed. But I live for comedy horror. I actually think there are a lot of misses, but I always think it's going to be a good time. It's also a little bit silly. It's fun. And that's what I think of when I say a good time. It's fun. It's fun. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just fun. And I do really like comedy horror. And it's also something I find people explore who actually love horror movies. There's always a lot of nods in them. I know I'm obviously got Shaun of the Dead, but there's Dale and Tucker, Black Sheep, a lot of New Zealand comedy horrors absolutely love. Deathgasm, Lisa Frankenstein. There's a lot of nods to other horror movies within them, which makes me think that a lot of people who do comedy horror movies have a big respect for horror and they show that through the work. So it's a fun time. Revenge is such a great, soulful, sad, but then so funny comedy horror. And it's just those elements of having twisted humor, you know, and twisted humor, that's what keeps the world going. So I definitely think it's a good time, most of the time. Cosmic horror. This is a Lovecraftian idea of weird fiction, so it is quite sci-fi and very much a visual representation of that. Think about films like The Endless. We've got Color Out of Space, Mandy, those kinds of movies. Every time, well, most of the time, beautiful. There's one called The Beach House, which is kind of body horror, cosmic horror. I think that they're mostly slow burns, all about atmosphere, oozing a feeling of beyond human belief or beyond human comprehension. And sometimes it can be existential in that way, but sometimes we want that. Sometimes we want a horror movie that really is going to move us. I love cosmic horror. I actually think that this is a really good one, and one that again went through a trend a little while ago where Nicolas Cage seemed to be in most of them. I actually think cosmic horror is all the way up there. Is that really bad? Maybe more unpredictable might be better. What I really love about cosmic horror is it usually comes from an idea And then it also has the aesthetic value to match that. It also is just beautiful, colorful, vast, but it also has to match that in its story, because it has to derive from something. It's not just plunking a werewolf into a field. It's the cosmic horror has to link into reality in some way and completely change that. It really transports you to another time. So I think cosmic horror is always a good time, especially when it's an independent film, because it feels like it comes from such a passionate place for the filmmakers. You can really tell that they've thought about every single aspect. It feels more of like a soulful experience, and then you add the horror element into it. It's intense, and a lot of them I adore. I didn't really know I felt that way about cosmic horror until we started this. That's quite nice. I feel like I'm always gonna have a good time with it. Creature feature is the last one we have here, guys. I can't believe it. We've done it. Okay, creature feature for me means so much. We've got Descent here, if you can't tell on that picture. That's what it is. It's the Descent. Creature feature can be werewolf, vampire sometimes, but it usually is outside of that. It's its own thing. It can be a animal that we know, Jaws, but it can also be animals like in the Descent. We have no idea what the hell those things are. They might be vampires. I think because of that, creature feature has to be unpredictable. It has to be. You just never really know what you're getting yourself into when it's a creature feature. Like I talked about recently, I saw Arcadian, and there was a beautiful story, beautiful landscape, beautiful relationship between the family, but then the reveals of the monster can make or break the film, truly. It is risky. It's a risky cinema trip, but I do find it to be a little bit more unpredictable than risky. I truly find myself being more interested about creature features and the reveal, when they're going to reveal it. I'm excited. There was a lot of spider films that came out this year, and I was always excited to see how they were going to lay the story out, what they're going to do with the reveals, what the monster's going to mean. There's a lot of it. But I do think it's unpredictable because there are so many different ways you can present the story. So I think it's more unpredictable than risky. Let's look back. Okay, what do we got? Ghost, psychological, alien, and witch at the top. There you go. I didn't even know how I felt about this until I did this, which is really interesting for me. But I would love to know where you guys will put this. This is probably going to be very split, obviously, on your personal opinion. I don't think I had to give a disclaimer at the start. Here it is. I'm going to time code this for some people if they need it. This is my list, of course, and you guys are more than welcome to make your own. I'll put the link down below. But honestly, guys, I am excited to see every horror movie that came out. This is just a fun little exercise, and I can really see what horror trends I am tired of by looking at this and what I will just never get enough of. Let me know if you liked this video. It was requested by you guys to do subgenres, and I just threw in themes as well because it made sense, you know, they all kind of go together. Do let me know in the comments your most anticipated and maybe your watch list purgatory. I would love to know both ends of the scale for you. And thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. Don't forget, last week I did a review for Trap. I let you know what's coming to VOD this month, and I did a wrap up of my watch list. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do enjoy tier videos, let me know what you want me to do next. And I'll talk to you guys all very soon. Bye, friends.